You say you know your worth, but your calendar doesn't reflect it. Your bank account doesn't reflect it. The way people speak to you doesn't reflect it. You answer messages immediately from people who delay replying to you for days. You discount your price before anyone asks. You tolerate small disrespect because you don't want to make it awkward. And at night, you tell yourself you deserve better. That gap between what you believe you're worth and how you behave is where frustration lives. This isn't about arrogance. It's about alignment. If you truly understood your value, certain negotiations would end faster. Certain habits would stop immediately. Certain conversations would never begin. Not because you're emotional, but because you're clear. In this video, you're going to understand why knowing your worth intellectually changes nothing until it becomes behavioral. You'll see the hidden patterns that make capable people underprice themselves, overextend themselves, and overexplain themselves. And more importantly, you'll walk away with a mental structure, a way to act that reflects value without announcing it. Because worth isn't declared. It's demonstrated in standards. If knowing your worth were enough, you would already be living at your highest standard. The problem isn't awareness. The problem is internal negotiation. There are 4 mechanisms quietly working against you. First, self-licensing bias. You work hard in one area, so you permit weakness in another. I stayed late at work, so I deserve to skip the workout. I helped everyone else, so I can ignore my own priorities. You trade long-term identity for short-term relief. Second, the approval loop. You equate being liked with being valuable. So you soften boundaries. You lower your price. You say yes when you mean no. You mistake acceptance for respect. Third, value amnesia. Under pressure, you forget your track record. One mistake, one rejection, one ignored message, and suddenly you behave as if you must prove yourself again from zero. Fourth, the emotional discounting effect. When you feel tired, uncertain, or slightly insecure, you reduce your own standard. Your mood becomes the authority instead of your principles. Here is the shift: worth is not a feeling. It is a policy. And policies do not fluctuate with mood. For example, imagine someone consistently asks for your time but cancels last minute. If you know your worth emotionally, you feel annoyed. If you act like you know your worth, you change the terms. You limit availability. You stop overcommitting. You remove casual access. Notice the difference. One is emotional reaction. The other is structural response. In the next part, we're going to go deeper into how to turn value from belief into behavior across work, money, health, and relationships without becoming rigid or hostile. When you don't fully own your value, you over-explain your decisions. You justify your pricing. You justify your boundaries. You justify why you need time. You soften your no with a paragraph. The hidden mechanism here is subtle insecurity disguised as politeness. You believe clarity requires defense. It doesn't. In the workplace, this shows up when you're given additional responsibilities without additional compensation. Instead of responding with a simple, measured conversation about scope and adjustment, you accept first, then complain later. Or you agree conditionally while internally resenting it. If you truly act like you know your worth, your response changes structure. You say, "I'm open to expanding my role." Let's discuss how that aligns with compensation and expectations. Calm. Direct. No hostility. Notice, no long emotional explanation. Just alignment. In relationships, it's the same. If someone repeatedly disrespects your time, you don't give a lecture on why it hurt you. You reduce access. You adjust your availability. There is a short line often attributed to Jim Rohn: you teach people how to treat you. Not through speeches. Through standards. I once watched a colleague quietly decline a project because the deadline was unrealistic. No anger. No performance. He simply said the timeline would compromise quality. The team adjusted. No one thought less of him. In fact, they trusted him more. Value expressed calmly increases respect. When you stop explaining excessively, you stop seeking permission to exist at your level. And that changes how the world responds. Most people try to increase their worth by chasing bigger goals. Higher income, better title, more visibility. But acting like you know your worth is less about raising your ceiling and more about raising your floor. Your floor is the minimum standard you tolerate. Minimum health, minimum savings, minimum treatment, minimum effort. The mechanism here is what I call fluctuating baseline behavior. You perform well when motivated, then drift when unnoticed. Your identity changes with context. If you act like your worth is stable, your minimum behavior becomes stable. Financially, this means automatic saving before discretionary spending. Not when you feel responsible. Always. Physically, it means a non-negotiable baseline, even on busy days. Maybe it's 20 minutes of movement. Not perfection. Consistency. Socially, it means refusing to participate in conversations that degrade your values. Even if silence feels awkward. The ceiling inspires you occasionally. The floor defines you daily. And identity is built on repetition. When your minimum standard rises, your life compounds upward quietly. You no longer need dramatic bursts of motivation because your baseline protects you from collapse. Acting like you know your worth isn't loud ambition. It's refusing to drop below your own line. That shift alone changes everything over a year. Your pricing, in business, and salary negotiations, and time, reveals your self-concept more than your skill level. Many competent people undercharge because they fear rejection more than they value alignment. The mechanism here is approval preservation. You subconsciously believe higher standards reduce belonging. So you discount yourself first. Imagine you're freelancing. A client questions your rate. If you act from insecurity, you immediately offer a reduction to secure the deal. You tell yourself volume will compensate. But over time, low pricing attracts low commitment. Deadlines stretch. Scope expands. Respect shrinks. When you act like you know your worth, negotiation becomes filtering. You're not trying to convince everyone. You're aligning with the right ones. This doesn't mean rigidity. It means clarity. You can adjust scope. You can adjust deliverables. But your standard doesn't collapse under pressure. The same principle applies inside a company. If you consistently accept below-market compensation without discussion, you silently agree with the undervaluation. Your behavior signals agreement. Value is not what you think internally. It's what you enforce externally. And enforcement doesn't require aggression. It requires composure. When your pricing reflects your identity, fewer opportunities appear, but better ones remain. That trait is maturity. If you truly understand your worth, you treat your energy as capital, not an unlimited resource. The mechanism working against you here is emotional diffusion. You scatter attention across low-return activities because saying no feels uncomfortable. You attend meetings that don't require you. You engage in arguments that change nothing. You scroll for an hour after work, telling yourself you're decompressing. Then you claim exhaustion. Acting like you know your worth means allocating energy intentionally. At work, this might mean blocking uninterrupted time for deep tasks instead of reacting all day. You stop equating busyness with contribution. Financially, it means steadying decisions before committing capital. You don't chase trends because others appear excited. In relationships, it means investing in conversations that build mutual growth, not repeated drama. There's a grounded truth here. Exhaustion often comes from misallocation, not overwork. When you protect energy, you signal internally that your focus matters. Over months, this compounds. You think clearer. You respond slower. You decide better. And slowly, your external results begin to match the internal respect you've established. Acting like you know your worth is not about demanding more from others first. It's about demanding better stewardship from yourself. When your time, money, and attention are handled with discipline, your life begins to reflect value without announcement. Most people misunderstand worth. They treat it like a motivational concept, something to feel on good days and rediscover on bad ones. But worth is not emotional elevation. It is operational discipline. When you act like you know your worth, you stop asking, "How do I feel about myself today?" and start asking, "What standard do I uphold regardless?" That shift changes the axis of your life. Instead of chasing validation, you build structure. Instead of reacting to disrespect, you prevent it through policy. Instead of hoping others recognize your value, you behave in ways that make misalignment obvious. This is where compounding begins. Small boundaries compound. Stable pricing compounds. Consistent health baselines compound. Protected energy compounds. Each decision seems minor in isolation. But over months and years, the gap between someone who negotiates with themselves and someone who operates from policy becomes dramatic. Self-respect is not loud. It is repetitive. Responsibility is not glamorous. It is daily. When your behavior aligns with your declared value, you remove internal friction. You stop resenting others for dynamics you permitted. You stop feeling overlooked for standards you never enforced. You become steady. And steadiness is powerful. There is a quiet confidence that comes from knowing you do not abandon your own line. Even when it costs you a deal. Even when it costs you approval. Even when it feels uncomfortable. Because over time, alignment produces leverage. People begin to understand where you stand. Opportunities begin to filter themselves. Your own mind begins to trust you. And that internal trust is the real asset. Acting like you know your worth is not about becoming harder. It is about becoming consistent. And consistency, over years, creates a life that mirrors your standards back to you. You don't need louder confidence. You need quieter alignment. Knowing your worth is easy to say in private. Acting like it is visible in public. In your calendar. In your pricing. In your boundaries. In your daily minimum standard. Every time you tolerate less than your own line, you weaken internal trust. Every time you uphold it, even when it costs you comfort, you strengthen identity. Over time, that identity becomes automatic. You no longer debate small compromises. You no longer chase approval disguised as opportunity. You no longer explain why your standards exist. They simply exist. And your life begins organizing itself around them. Because worth, when expressed through disciplined behavior, stops being a statement. It becomes a structure. And structures do not argue. They stand.